Civil war erupts historically in many places when people no longer believe the government exists. Or they, like, we talked about this on the Culture War with the Roman Empire, when we were talking about the history of the Roman Empire. And a lot of people like to say what's happening in the US right now is so much like the Roman Empire. It's the barbarians storming the gates. And then I end up talking to these guys and they're like, which period in the thousands of years of Rome are you talking about? Because people like to mix and match different parts of Rome to make it seem like we're in Rome right now. And turns out we're actually not. There's similarities to some parts of it, but it's not very much like it at all. Well, what you end up seeing with the fall of the Roman Empire is a guard in the eastern portion, which eventually breaks away into what was it?
Eastern Roman Empire, which became the Byzantine Empire later.
Right. It's because a soldier walks up to someone and says, "I am a soldier," and they go, "Yeah, buddy, get in line like everybody else." And they say, "Did you hear what I said? I am the soldier. I represent Rome." And they go, "Rome who?" And then all of a sudden, it matters not what you think your enforcement is. The way I've described it before is actually much simpler. If you got a knock on your door and you looked in your people and there was a guy in a clown costume and you said, "Can I help you?" And he held up a warrant and said, "I'm from the clown police and you need to open your door," you'd be like, "Okay, buddy, you need to get off my property now or else." Right now, we are in a country where when law enforcement shows up to your house, you recognize the law enforcement. You say, "Okay." Or a lot of people actually now are calling cops. We've seen this with federal law enforcement. It happened in Ohio, a couple of years ago, when an ATF guy showed up to some lady's house. She called the police. The police detained the ATF guy. You get to this point where people laugh and say, "When was the last time your agency actually did anything to anybody?" And they view the uniform no different than they would view a clown costume, as something unrecognizable, silly, and a joke. That's how Rome breaks. When confidence no longer exists, the badge means anything.
Well, but the badge doesn't have to mean anything if the gun means something. I mean, you're going to do what they say, and you're going to treat them like an armed person. Maybe the uniform doesn't matter, but it wouldn't matter if...
So what would you do if a clown showed up to your house with a gun, banging, saying, "Let me in"?
Well, it's... I mean, that's a very silly example. But if it's a group of clowns that kick down my door in the middle of the night and point them in my face and say "hands up," I would have to put my hands up and go with them.
I think I feel like you're making excuses to try and justify why you think confidence can't break in government, because we all know what would happen, because we've all seen it happen in this country, and it happens very, very often when plainclothes police officers kick doors in without announcing themselves. Armed homeowners fire back. Mm-hmm. We do not want violence. We do not want this escalation. But when it comes to the point where there's a guy who lives in a rural area and someone shows up and says, "I'm from insert whatever department," and they say, "I don't recognize that because you guys have assisted, you've done this, you've done that, or otherwise," and then they say, "Open the door or else," and he says, "I'm going to make a phone call real quick." My point is that when it comes to a local community feeling like they're being invaded, like this guy saying his daughter was killed and he has no purpose anymore. In Florida, they've dealt with this quite a bit, which is why they have the government they do. But if you live in a place where a guy's daughter was just killed and that dad goes to his buddies and says, "If I call you, will you answer?" They say, "You got it, buddy." And then what happens when some government agency comes to his house and they say, "Now's the time to get on your knees. We have the guns." He goes, "I'm calling my buddies." The buddies show up and they say, "You guys need to turn around and get out of here." That's what's happened historically. That's what I fear may happen as we're watching the border collapse and the Biden administration do nothing.
This is what I'm so interested in with the George Allen Kelly case. They were answering in Arizona who got arrested because there were people illegal immigrants coming onto his property, and he shot one. His jury selection started today, and I think the outcome of this case will sort of take the temperature of what you're talking about, because so many people in that community said, yes, this is a problem. We're right against the border with Mexico. We have people cross illegally through our property all the time. Kelly had specifically fired warning shots before, I believe. I'm not super up to date on this case, so I'll get better on my reporting. But, people kind of rallied around him when this broke, because he's in his 70s and he's facing, second-degree murder charges for trying to defend his own property, especially in a specific case where he's right against a federal border, the Mexico border.
Well, yeah, and according to him, the illegal immigrant he shot aimed a gun at him first. So,
right.
So in any reasonable situation, he would have never been arrested, but he has been arrested and he's being charged with second-degree murder. My question is, how would the mass breakout of this happen without coordination? I mean, unless it just magically happens in a bunch of different places at once. Well, yeah, what would be the...
That's an absurd word to use.
Well, but that's what it would take, because...
Well, first you have a couple different concepts surrounding... you have the ideas of mass formation psychosis, this. This is something we use in a negative context where people begin to adopt rapid behaviors through mass media. So certainly I wouldn't call it magic that the wokeness mind virus emerges and infects all of our media. You then have the other concept of a standalone complex, where tons of people all take similar actions at the same time, which creates the perception of organization or conspiracy. It is actually quite simple. When the media reports that an old man defending his property is going to prison for defending himself against a criminal alien invader, you start, I guarantee you, it's already happened, that there have been guys in rural parts of the country who've sat down and had conversations, say, what do we do if one of these guys comes onto our property? You hear they arrested that guy? And they said, look, we'll create a group chat. Just let me know if you see anything happening. If something happens, we'll come, we'll take it. We got your back. Okay. That's the beginning. It's not about a magical organization. No, organization doesn't need to happen. It's a guy calling his son. It's a guy calling his brother. It's a guy sending out a mass text from his phone right now to all his buddies who live within 30 miles, being like, there's a group of criminal aliens and they're sitting on my property and they've got guns and they're threatening to shoot me. Help, I need help.
Right, but the instant he sends that message, the instant he goes online to try to coordinate this, he's getting a knock on the door by the FBI. The thing is, it is spot cleaning, but unless it all erupts at once and there's too many spots for them to deal with, they will individually.
Literally my point.
Right.
My fear is we get to the point where there are too many criminal alien invaders. You've got millions now in the country. You've got people posting videos saying seize their homes. Vigilantes in New York successfully evicted some squatters. We know what happens next when law enforcement breaks down, and nobody wants to live that way. So we're already at the point now where you have had numerous shocking incidents around the country, and it starts slow, grains of sand added to a heap, but the federal government does not have the capability to react to widespread loss of confidence with millions of criminal aliens in this country. If it comes down to you've got roving gangs in cities smashing up stores. There was a video out of Chicago where one of these guys starts shooting at one of the windows like crazy. Eventually, you get what you saw in New York in November. A mugger attacks somebody and a guy pulls a gun and opens fire. They stop caring. Eventually, you get the riots like George Floyd. And when people called the police, what did the police say? Sir, the city is under attack. What would you have us do? A mother and her daughter were in their car, and I think this might have been in Virginia, and the rioters started attacking the car, and she called police, and they said, sorry, we can't help you. We can't do anything about this. The riots weren't organized to a certain degree. Some of the protests were organized, but people came out and joined in because in cities they went nuts. If you get a comparable thing to the George Floyd riots in rural areas, federal government cannot enforce against that in the same way the NYPD could not enforce the George Floyd riots. At that point, your hope is things calm down. There's a period of stabilization where the local militia groups are not in active conflict. Someone like Trump gets elected, restores communication, rebuilds that confidence, and we don't devolve into outright civil war.
Yeah, I don't see that happen. I mean, this is all deliberate, right? They're collapsing America on purpose. They don't have to let 1 million people in. They don't have to fly 300,000 people in. They're doing this on purpose. This is sort of the desired outcome, because what is the normal person who's not going to pick up a gun and go to, join a militia? They want more government when things start to collapse. The more it collapses, the more they cling to daddy government to, and empower them more. And this is why we have people in the subways in New York. I mean, that's not a lack of government participation. It's an upgrade of government participation.
The logical line that you are following is that civil wars never have happened before, cannot happen. Rome never collapsed. Well, as if confidence in, like, the Roman Empire decided one day we would just cease to exist.
Well, yeah, Rome's a different issue. Rome provided the blueprint that the people are following now, and it was pretty similar, especially when you had groups of Germanics coming in, almost exactly like we're seeing now, saying,
how did the Soviet Union collapse?
It lasted for 80 years with the most powerful country in the world arrayed against it, along with NATO and everybody else. These things can last forever, and we don't have any. I mean, why
69 years?
Why hasn't South Africa descended into civil war yet? These degradation can go on forever. Well, how long has it been? 40 years
since the end of apartheid,
or 30? Yeah.
30?
Yeah.
Maybe it takes longer. These are different scenarios. These are different circumstances. For all we know, what's happening in the U.S. could take 8 years.
Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating. That's sort of in alignment with Strauss-Howe generational theory.
We've got way better communication tech now, which is a big difference than what the Romans had. We have telephones. We have instant communication over long distance.
Which rapidly speeds up everything from organization to disorganization.
Yeah.
So in the instance that You say, how do people organize so quickly? The internet.
Well,
That's how
okay,
flash mobs started.
and so the government will say, hey, these dangerous militia groups are using the internet to, organized insurrection. We have to, take more control of the internet. We have to shut down the internet.
If the internet shut down, neighborhood watches and local militias would form in 10 seconds.
But then how would they communicate with others?
They don't need to. They don't need to. They don't need to. You're misunderstanding. I am not talking about 10 million armed Trump supporters waving Trump flags. I'm talking about 7 guys in rural Oklahoma being like, I don't know anybody, anywhere, or anything. All I know is I'm defending my chickens. One day, federal agents try driving through and they say, you can't come through here. The federal agents say, yes, we can. We're federal agents. I don't know nothing about no federal agents. I ain't got no internet. I ain't got no phone. It's my land. Back off.
Yeah, I mean, that type of thing happened in the 90s, and they burned 80 kids alive and still celebrate it to this day.
But that's not correct. That's not absolutely.
You're talking about
first you've got Ruby Ridge and you've got Waco, and those are entirely different scenarios where a single isolated spot was removed. It's spot removal.
Right.
They can't handle a total confidence breakdown. It's not possible.
Yeah, I think that what we're being told is they have total surveillance control and can find you anywhere, anytime but the reality is, no, it's not. They don't. They have some, and I think that is, like I said earlier, this technocratic nightmare where they want it, but it's not. The reality is the humans are running the show, and if the humans decide to break, then the show breaks.
But they are establishing it, and you only need to do it to one group to send a signal out to all the others to go where they look at that and go, oh crap, I don't want to be burned to death. I better not do what I was planning on doing.
The inverse happens. You take a look at what happened in Syria. What sparked the Syrian Civil War? When groups of protesters started growing, Bashar al-Assad declared many of these people to be terrorists. Maybe they were, I don't know, and started actually opening fire on some of these groups, creating there was like a dozen or more. There was probably like 50 emergent factions at the start of the Civil War, and they slowly began to coalesce as the fighting continued. The breakdown is not like a bunch of people hold a continental congress and then hereby decree. It's that 5 people in one area are fighting, and then you go, did you hear what just happened, dude? 50 miles down, they torched the Johnson's place. We better get our boys ready for what they're going to bring.
Yeah,
it escalates the violence.
It could have either result. You could cow the people by terrifying them from a brute force attack, or you could enrage them and end up having them rise up against you. So you would have to be really, really careful about
not
about
rural
doing
Americans.
Like that.
Urban Americans will absolutely, as we saw with COVID, they will hide in their basements and they will get on their knees when they're told to. But as we saw with the Bundy scenario, it is very, very much likely the opposite.
Yeah, obviously the Syrian government didn't actually go down. So, and they're a lot less capable and powerful than the American government is. I just think that, in a way, theoretically,
I didn't say it was going to win.
Well, but in a way, and theoretically, you're right, because there have been groups that have shown that this is the successful way to do things. In Lebanon, for example, you have local militias that do not allow, the Lebanese federal government in. They control it. They lock it down. It's definitely possible. I just don't think that the government is anywhere near exhausted its capabilities in terms of why wouldn't they launch another, COVID lockdown and, use that as an excuse to tamp down on people.
It wouldn't work.
Or what? I did the last time, didn't
it? It worked in New York City. Didn't work in most of rural America. You go out to West Virginia and everyone was like, what COVID?
Right. Yeah, I just think that, again, I like the idea of communities patrolling themselves and not allowing the federal government in. And there are actually mechanisms to do that through the...
at all.
You don't?
I absolutely do not like the idea that the federal government has become a rogue state that is targeting political factions and allowing invasion at our border, and that people may lose confidence in the system and take up weapons themselves. Sounds like a nightmare scenario. You may say that Syria has maintained their government, but take a look at their cities. Ain't nobody wants to live that way.
Right.
And I don't.
But that's where we're headed, and I think the American government seems deliberate in that policy. Again, there's no reason why they would be allowing all these people in. Why they are fighting so hard.
They're not as powerful as you think they are. People like to talk about. You just said we have drones. Yeah, tell that to Afghanistan. The Taliban took over in 2 seconds. They took everything, and now they have weapons. This idea that, perhaps the real conspiracy is that the government tries to maintain conspiracy theories, shout out to South Park, to convince people like you that they're so powerful that nothing would ever stop them, when in fact, they've shown themselves to be completely incapable. Even right now, The best argument to be made is that the Biden administration wants the people to break through the southern border. Okay, perhaps that's a fair argument to make, or you can make another argument. They're unable to do anything about it.
Well, they could certainly do something. I mean, when they're flying 300,000 people in, I mean, they could just not do that, right? I mean, when they're actually putting injunctions and stopping the Texas National Guard, when they're going in and removing barbed wire, that's not them being weak.
They want it to happen.
Right.
So my point is, you could make the argument that the federal government is incapable of securing the entirety of its borders.
But it's not. It's deliberately not.
We know that they're flying people, and that's not my point.
Yeah.
There is not enough U.S. military personnel to secure every inch of its borders. That's why even in San Diego, they just swim in.
Mm-hmm.
So if you go to Tijuana, it's really funny. The fence goes like
40 feet out into the water, and 80 feet out. You just swim around it.
And they quite literally do.
It's nuts.
So what they do is they'll get scuba gear. They'll go short ways up, go underwater, swim into San Diego till they get to a beach, and then take the gear off and pop up. And
I was in Tijuana looking at that, just thinking like, I could just swim. Do they have snipers waiting? Because why aren't people just swimming around the border around the border wall?
No, in fact, there's a hole in the border there where in the middle of the night, people just go through. Now, by all means, I think it's fair to say the Biden administration certainly wants these people to come in.
Right.
And so my point ultimately is there are not enough military personnel, CBP personnel, law enforcement to actually maintain control in the event of a loss of confidence. For example, the George Floyd riots. The George Floyd riots happened and the police just left.
But that was another deliberate thing, right? I mean, that was...
No, whether it's deliberate or not that's conjecture.
Well, no, I mean, when you have like the federal government, giving him a funeral with a golden casket and taking a knee and wearing the kente cloth, and when you have the local mayors joining in with the, I mean, how about this? When you had them tearing down statues in places like, I think it was Alabama, you had the mayors actually showing up and going, hey, let us do it. We'll bring in a crane and we'll do this for you. I mean, this is deliberate. It's not like they can't stop some of this stuff.
We're getting lost in the weeds because, simply put, what I am stating is fact. It is a historical fact. It is a fact of humanity. No government has ever been strong enough to maintain itself against lack of confidence from the people. It is just mathematically impossible.
You'll know it if you play video games like I do. When your own people rebel against you, those are your own troops. So it's not like you have to fight enemy troops with your troops. You actually lose half of your troops, and then you have to fight against your own guys.
If the idea of supreme government if the idea was that if government wanted to, they would never lose control, there would have never been a single civil war or revolution throughout history. The fact that the American Revolution happened...
We're talking about the American government right now, though.
And you seem to live in this world where they are gods.
No,
How many federal law enforcement personnel are there?
Enough to systematically go through and round up every single person that was at the Capitol over the last 4 years. I mean, the thing is, they are doing it piecemeal.
137,000 full-time personnel that are authorized to carry firearms in 50 states. Mm-hmm. 137,000 people. You think 137,000 people is enough in a country of 330 million in the event of confidence breaking down?
No, I think in the hypothetical where you have confidence completely breaking and everybody, I don't know. I don't really understand the scenario you're setting up. I mean, right now we've got a completely broken southern border. We've got them flying people in. We've got this systematic influx of people sponsored by the American government through the UN and all these other NGOs that are bringing people in by the millions. There's no reason why that's going to stop. I don't know what.
I agree.
I don't know what I mean, we already have murders taking place. I mean, at what level do you think it'll get to that this spontaneous, non-magical uprising will take place? I mean,
the fact that you called it magical, I think, shows that you haven't read enough about historical conflicts.
I'm pretty well read in history.
But you said magically happened. What do you mean? In tons of countries throughout history, there have been pockets where confidence is shattered and people begin to assert autonomy.
Okay.
They'll declare sovereignty, and that's why I use the example of Rome, the most popular example. When it came to the point where the Roman Empire fractured, it's because when soldiers would come and say, "I hereby enforce," they'd laugh and they'd say, "No, you don't. You don't do anything." And then when you're 10 law enforcement officers, mm-hmm. and you walk into a marketplace, everybody, we're gonna need you to clear out. Federal law enforcement's moving in, and they go, "Get out of here," and they do nothing. You go, "Hey, did you hear what I just said?" And they go, "Yeah, I heard what you said. Get out of here." And then all of a sudden, they've got 50 locals with crowbars being like, shut up. We don't know who you are. You don't live here, and we don't care what you think. That's historically what happens when confidence breaks in government. It happened thousands of times throughout history. And my fear is it happens here. When we cite Thucydides' trap as a reference to potential war with China, it's because historically, this is what happens. And now we are looking to the past to try and predict the future based on current circumstances. And we're hoping that though history is rhyming, it's not going to repeat. We don't want World War III, but it seems like no matter what we do, we are inching towards that. 137,000 full-time law enforcement in a country of 330 million. If 10% of the US population simply said, I'm not going to pay taxes, there is no physical way that the federal government could do anything about it. That's 30 million people to 137,000 law enforcement officers.
But what I'm saying is how would that happen spontaneously? It would have to be coordinated, and as soon as the coordination,
you're arguing that like
because people aren't going to take the risk.
The Eastern Roman Empire organized the fracture, and like things break apart when deals break. How does a company go out of business? There's sometimes the money dries up and the guy says, hey boss, how come you're not paying me anymore? And he goes, we don't have enough money. Bye. Oh no, now I no longer have a security guard at my front door. Right. Then a bunch of guys come in and steal stuff. How did they steal stuff? Did those criminals organize with the security guard? No, but resources broke down.
But if there are, like happened in 2020, riots breaking out in 100 cities at once, that was coordinated, it was communicated, it was organized in a very obvious.
That's a gross overestimation. Some of the protests were organized, but a lot of it was just people seeing social media and then going outside and
communicating with one another.
And the real reason for the riots was that they were locked in their homes for 6 months in cubicles and they lost their minds. They didn't actually care for the most part about George Floyd. Thanks for watching this clip from the Timcast IRL podcast. Hang out with us live Monday through Friday at 8 p.m. and become a member over at timcast.com for uncensored, members-only shows exclusive. Thanks for hanging out, and we'll see you all next time.